Welcome to this Swedish soprum. You might be wondering, what am I doing in a Swedish soprum? And what is a Swedish soprum? Well, first off, a Swedish soprum is, if you live in an apartment, sometimes in Sweden, you get this lovely kind of a room in your basement where you recycle stuff. You throw your recycling. You have like cardboard, televisions, metal. You kind of get my point. The thing is, this month, which is the month of April, I have joined sort of a challenge, which is to build something from trash. Trashbash. So I'm here to get inspired by the lovely smells and, you know, suck in just the good vibes of the Swedish soprum to see if I can find some nice things to build. Another basement. This video is not going to be about basements. It is going to be about building things out of trash. But at the moment, we're living in this, motorbike. We're living sort of in a pandemic at the moment. And for some people, that means getting more time on their hands, having to stay at home. You know, I'm having to stay at home with the result of me getting less time, pretty much. As you can see, things are looking a bit different. I try and film wherever I can, when I can. At the moment, that means me standing in my basement. I'm also going to do this like a vlog, a video log. I film as I go. So I might release, you know, an episode before I even know what this build will actually look like. That's not usually how I do it. And the film material will look a bit different from my other videos as well. I'm not going to pay too much attention to the quality or whatever things look like. I'm just going to film and build and try and focus on that. Now, going back to building things out of trash, which is what this video and maybe a couple of more will be about, is my biggest issue is that the trash, our trash, which is sort of plastic containers, metal containers, whatever, it's usually square or round, or like, it's not very sort of fantasy looking. It's more like futuristic looking. I've seen several things I could build that'd be like, you know, parts from old computers, electronics, plastic packets that sort of have cool square rivets, whatever. I definitely could see myself build a futuristic build, something for 40K or, you know, sci-fi games or whatever. But finding trash that I can build stuff for fantasy is a bit more challenging. For some reason, whoever designs packaging doesn't design them as cobbled roads or in the shape of tiled roofs, things like that, which is a bit of a shame. And somewhere I also have to sort of draw a line in, you know, what can I use that isn't trash? Like, you know, I still have to use glue. I'm not going to make my own glue out of old bananas. And, you know, I'll probably use clay because I'm not going to go out and try and make clay from compost. Yeah, it's sort of pushing it. But I'm going to try and use as much as I can find that is in theory garbage or rubbish or recyclables for this build. Now, most importantly, what am I going to build? Well, at the moment I'm painting some orcs, or in the trademarkable world they're called orruks. Green folks. They look kind of angry, kind of large. They need a home. They need somewhere to live. So I want to build, not a village, it's stretching it, but maybe some kind of orc structure. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, what does that look like? Have you seen what sort of fantasy, what, do they live in caves? Do they live in tents? Do they not live anywhere? And that was kind of a fun challenge. Well, that is a fun challenge, because I don't really have a, if they would be knights in shining armor, I'd be like, okay, I need to build a castle with walls and And then it's like, well, where do orcs live? I don't know. My first initial thoughts are, apart from it's weird that I'm standing in my basement talking, and there's cars, sound from cars coming through the ventilation, and the light's horrible. Apart from that, it's kind of inspiring to, try and, I really have to come up with sort of, at least for me, a new concept, because I don't have a idea of, like, I haven't seen pictures of orc houses, which is fun. I get to use my imagination. But I'm thinking rocks. I'm thinking there should be a rock. And I'm thinking they should be sort of living in something that's sort of like a tent, but not a tent. And everything is still supposed to be kind of nice, because I think, the Orruks, at least, they have pretty advanced stuff going on. They've got armor, and one's got a claw and stuff, so they should be able to, like, build some kind of a building. It's not like they're total, well, they're probably total maniacs, but they're not. They seem to have some kind of culture going. So it's a fun challenge, building an orc settlement out of rubbish. It's like the backs of all, like, you frame your photographs or whatever. This is the back, probably IKEA. Should make a good base. So I started out with this piece of hardboard, cutting it down a little bit because it was just a little bit too big. And like, I got some miniatures out, the Orruks, and also just a big miniature, just to sort of see how things can fit in, because I think I want a mountain or a hill kind of a thing, and like two sort of tent kind of structures on the sides, and maybe a third building separate to that. So I'm just sort of sketching it out to get an idea of where I want to place things. I noticed with this styrofoam packaging that I found that if I take a piece and break it apart, it's got this lovely sort of bubbly structure. And I thought, that'll work as my fantasy looking kind of hill. So I'm going to build this hill in sort of layers of packaging, styrofoam packaging, and using this bubbly texture as basically as my hillside texture. Then afterwards I might have to cover it up here and there with some sand or some clay, but as a basic texture, I think this styrofoam bubbly bits, it'll be a pretty cool hillside. So I used white glue to glue this styrofoam to the hardboard base. And I've been using white glue throughout this build so far. I don't have a hot glue gun, whatever you call them. So that's one reason I just use white glue. But for like styrofoam and stuff like that in particular, white glue is kind of great because it doesn't sort of melt the styrofoam. But the downside is it just takes longer to dry. I noticed pretty quickly after this first layer that the board, it flexes when the glue dries. The glue sort of shrinks and sort of pulls the board up, so it sort of looks a bit sort of wonky. And I sort of knew this would happen, kind of, because it's thin, really bad quality IKEA hardboard. But so I used a bottle of adult beverage that was standing on my table and just put it down in the middle of the board and kept it there while I was gluing all this styrofoam in place. And that actually sort of kept it pretty level. And then I just built up my little hill, going layer by layer, until I got to the point where I sort of needed to start thinking about what are these tent structures going to look like. This is the thing with this entire build, is like I really don't have a plan. I have a plan, but it's a step-by-step plan. So I sort of start off, like I started off, okay, let's build a hill. I started building a hill, and then I'm like, okay, I need some kind of tent structure. What could that be? And I haven't really got a super clear idea, but I figured they should be on sort of stilts or something. They should be up from the ground, and they should have some kind of walls just a little bit of wall and then sort of a tent roof. That's my basic idea. And I realized that they're probably not just tents, they're probably sort of entrances to caves. So it's sort of like the patio, the orruk patio, where they can sort of drink their tea or coffee in the afternoons watching the sunset. And, you know, sorry. I wanted sort of the entrance into the caves to be a bit more sort of not just the bubbly plastic, but sort of a bit harder angles and sort of a bit bunker looking, even though, okay, so fantasy bunker looking. And so I actually cut out strips, sort of the same size as an orruk, to make sort of some hard sides where I'm going to build the tent structure later on. And as I'm doing this, as I go along, I realized it would be nice if these sort of tent structures were not on the same level. When building things like this, it's nice to sort of take a step back and just look at it and think about these small details. Like it's easy to get into the sort of, I'm doing this on this side, I'll do the same on that side, and then everything sort of starts looking the same. And because I don't have a real life inspiration, I haven't got a photograph or anything to sort of go by, it's all sort of coming out of my head. It's even more sort of important to try and just do it a little bit different every time. And once my little hill is sort of complete, it's not fully complete, but I'm not going to get into any detail work on the hill until I've finished most of the structures and everything, because as I said, honestly, I'm not really sure where this is going, so I don't want to put too much work into details when, you know, in a few days' time, I might just be cutting those details off because I got a new idea of something. Sorry, there's a neighbor, hi. Once the sort of basic styrofoam hill was done, I needed to start on the small tent buildings. And I used the hardboard again. So while cutting these bases out for the sort of tents, I realized that, you know, I need to start adding some kind of details to this. And I thought, you know, there should be some kind of wooden foundation things sticking out. And I've got coffee stirrers. Now these aren't technically trash, but I did go into a coffee shop and asked if I could grab a bunch for free. So it's not trash, but at least it's for free. So I used, there's going to be tons of coffee stirrers, I think, in this build. And I just glued them underneath with a little bit sticking out. So it looks like it's sort of wooden logs kind of foundation thing sticking out from underneath the platform. And then I was thinking of, well, what should I build the sort of stilts from? Whatever, you know, I was trying out with coffee stirrers, and then I thought, you know, there's a lot of wine corks lying about. I've got no idea where these wine corks come from. It's like this is places like a black hole for wine corks. It's strange. They just appear magically from nowhere. But anyway, I realized I could do sort of bricks, cut out bricks. It could be bricks or it could be logs, square logs or whatever, and do sort of like pillars, but really wonky, sort of someone's just put some logs on top of each other just to keep this sort of structure raised off the ground. Once my sort of wonky cork support thingies were done, I realized I didn't really want to glue the entire platform in place at once, because I just wanted to sort of think ahead and make things easier for me. Because in the end, all this styrofoam is going to have to be painted with something that can resist sort of spray paint, super glue, these kind of things that melt styrofoam. Super glue, pour super glue on this and it'll sort of eat through it. Same goes with sort of spray paints like rattle can spray and things like that. So in the end, I'm going to cover it all with Mod Podge, which is, I'm still not sure. I think it's sort of like white glue with a bit of resin in it or something like that. You could probably just use white glue and brush it over. But I've got Mod Podge and I've added some black pigment and some black paint into it. So it's just, you know, sort of grey-black colored so I can see where I'm painting, because if it's white it's really difficult to see what you're covering. And black is nice because I'm probably going to zenithal prime the whole build later on, so it'll be covered with black first. So black is nice. Talking a lot, not getting anywhere. If you're wondering, if you're sort of thinking, wow, you're talking fast and stuff, I'm trying to fit this in kind of while my kid's out for 10 minutes. Anyway, so I painted Mod Podge wherever it'll be tricky to paint it later on, before I glued the platforms on. And same thing goes for the ground underneath. Now I haven't really decided on what I'm going to do with all this empty hardboard, but just in case, I want to put some clay on there just to get some kind of a sort of texture going. And then I was worried that, you know, how will the clay stick to this sort of wonky hardboard? And if I just pick it up and go like this, with all the clay just crack off? So I added some scrap bits of hardboard and white glue, and then I had sand on the white glue just to give the clay something to sort of hold on to. I have no scientific proof that this works at all. It's just, it seems reasonable to me that, you know, the more things the clay has to hold on to, the less chance that it sort of comes off. I also mixed in white glue into my clay to even just harden it even more. Not sure either if that actually works, but it's sort of small precautions that I hope in the end will serve a purpose. I had to wait though for this sort of sandy white glue thingy to completely dry before I added the clay. And then I added the clay with white glue already mixed into the clay and sort of smudged it out. And then I usually, I use a toothpick as a basic shaping tool just to get some sort of just different textures and shapes going. And then usually I don't think I've actually filmed that because, as you can see, my sons, we were doing this together and it started to get messy after a while. But I grab a pretty big brush with just a little bit of water on it, and just to smoothen out the sort of rough edges of the sort of toothpick texturing. What I did forget though was because for some strange reason the adult beverage bottle was empty. It's really strange. It was full and then the next day it was empty. And so I sort of forgot to put it on there while the clay dried. And so my hardboard went a little bit wonky. I'm hoping I can fix it by adding more clay later on and sort of forcing the whole thing down, but we'll see. Now, once this whole clay procedure was done, I could actually glue the platforms in place and start building the actual sort of tent structure. Sort of by mistake, I realized, hold on, that with this hardboard, it's really sort of flaky, and when you sort of do that, you can see that it's a lot of sort of thin layers of whatever this is, some kind of wood industry residue. And so I cut it up with a knife and separated it. And the inside has got a really sort of nice texture to it. It's sort of, what do you call it? Like walls, outside walls, staccato, is that what you call it? I don't know. It's a nice texture anyway. And so, sorry, another neighbor. So I decided that the bottom part of my hut, tent hut, slash Orruk coffee patio was going to be this, built out of this sort of inside of the hardboard. So I cut out pieces of walls. I think they're about 2 centimeters high, and glued them in place. And I even used a bit of support and a lot of glue. And here comes my son. I had to take a little break, and now I'm back and I'm outside, and that's just the way it is in these pandemic days. Now, I had just finished off telling you about the hardboard wall, and my next step is actually using, like, I've got these tinned tomato tins, and I wanted to use the metal as the next part of the wall, sort of, so that it looks like sort of metal sheets or something. They've got this sort of a little bit of a wobbly thing going that I kind of like. I want to point out that if you intend to mimic my technique, you do need special type of scissors to cut in metal, and when you cut in this kind of metal, everything, it's really sharp when you're done. So beware that you don't cut yourself. I myself cut with that scissors, and then I used one of my small nail files to file down the edges so I wouldn't sort of unintentionally hurt myself while, building the build. But I cut out sheets of metal, sort of roughly the same size as the pieces of hardboard before. And the only thing here is to get these to fit is a lot more fiddly. Like I had to cut out sort of small bits here and there, and I wanted them to sort of overlap. So this is a little bit more fiddly. I also added like some cuts in the bottom to make it look a little bit more sort of worn and torn. And in this case, I used super glue first, just to get them to stick there, because this would be very difficult to use with white glue. Somewhere along the way, I also decided I wanted some small windows, because I found this sort of sour cream, the lid of a sour cream jar, organic sour cream. So obviously it has to be green because it's organic. And I thought that would make kind of nice glass. So because I got that idea, I realized, well, then I'll have to do windows. And so they're sort of triangular windows that I cut out, just one on each sort of little hut. And once all these metal sheets were in place, it was time to add the sort of timbers or whatever it is that's going to hold the cloth of the tent roof up. And for this I used sprue, again, long pieces of sprue. I've sharpened all the edges so that they sort of look a little bit spiky. All the edges pointing upwards, the other ones are just flat. And I actually cut a little bit in the metal where I wanted every sort of sprue, because I don't want, when the tent roof goes up, whatever that's going to be made out of, I don't want sort of a gap there. So, and it actually turned out pretty well, because if I bent it inwards, it gave me a surface to actually get a proper sort of glue surface going. But I cut holes in the metal for all the sprue, and then just sort of a bit randomly attached all the different pieces of sprue. And now it's all starting to look like a proper, not proper, but it's starting to look like structures anyway. And I think this will be the end for this week's video, because I need some time to think about the cloth and how I'm going to solve that. Yeah, I've made a hill. I've made the sort of basic structure of two little tents, and now I need to continue finishing the tents, finishing the hill, doing another structure. I'm already starting to think, should there be a well? Should there be like an altar? What have they got going all around there? What should I, there's quite a lot of stuff still to do, but this is a really fun start, and I like it. It feels, I need to sort of brutalize it a bit more, maybe add some more sheets of metal or something to make it look a little bit more orc, but sort of the concept to me feels kind of orcish, and I'm kind of pleased. Now this has all been a bit of a different format, different locations, inside, outside, basements and things like that, and it'll keep on going like this until probably this build is done. I hope you've enjoyed this so far, and please feel inspired to do your own sort of, what can I build out of trash? Doesn't have to be like trash as in, garbage, bananas, peels, and that kind of stuff, but recyclables preferably. And sorry, if you're playing like a futuristic game, I'm sure you could find a lot more things that are sort of easier to get more things for free, easier builds. I've really just sort of been using materials I can find and sort of chopping them up and just using it as building materials. Building futuristic stuff, I think, might be a bit easier. But anyway, please feel inspired, and thanks for watching.